Hello everyone. Before we get started today, I'd just like to say by introductory way of remarks that I've been put up to this by Navark David Reeves. You will obviously know what the video is about from the title. Now, when Mr. Reeves requested this topic, I said to him, well, I don't know, I don't think people would be interested. I don't think this subject has really got legs. Then there was a massive thread in the members' Discord of people talking about this very issue. So, obviously, it does warrant some discussion, apparently. But I'd like to say, I've been put up to this by David Reeves. And if you want to give me nicer things to talk about that are a little bit easier than this, and, a little less dry, then, feel free to become a member and join at the commander tier, and you can request videos, and I can not have to fulfill this man's sadistic requests. Anyway, on with the video. So today we're going to be talking about shift patterns. Basically how it's brought up in Next Generation Chain of Command. That's the big one. There's even little fun moments in Lower Decks where they talk about Delta Shift and how Delta Shift sucks, and, they hate those Delta Shift guys. It is an acknowledged part of life on the Starship. And it's also, to an extent, the discussion between the different shift patterns has some relevance. IRL, there is a sort of ongoing conversation about that, about what is the better work day, a 6-hour work day or an 8-hour work day. So I'm going to try and sort of explore this issue and sort of see what interesting ideas kind of come out of this. So basically, the first thing to do is outline the two shift patterns we are going to be talking about. We are talking about either a 4-shift pattern, which is 4 shifts of 6 hours to fill up 24 hours, or there are 3 8-hour shifts. Easy enough. Now, it's worth pointing out that modern naval ships, or surface ships, I will say, not all naval ships because submarines don't do this, but surface ships operate on a different kind of routine. They operate on basically everyone gets up during the day and does stuff around the ship. There is something to be doing. You will find something to do. So essentially the way you then work out these shifts is you just divide up the crew by the number of shifts you want. So if you want 3 shifts, divide your crew by 3. 4 shifts, divide your crew by 4. Now this does produce some interesting problems. If we divide the Enterprise D crew by 3, we get around 330 people. 330 people to operate a Galaxy class at any one time. Yes, obviously, when it's action stations, when it goes into battle, everyone's at their stations, but apart from that, when it's just kind of casually flying around, going from place to place, there's only about 300 people on. Now, people might argue, automation. I would argue that no, you need a lot, and I will explain why. Because one of the issues you need to consider when dividing up shift patterns is what work needs doing. You see, in any working day or any working shift, there is going to be 2 kinds of work. And this applies just as much in the military as it does apply in certain aspects of the civilian sector. So in a working shift, there are 2 kinds of work. There is business of the day. That can be anything, really, just sort of, for example, if you work in a restaurant, that's serving the food. Or if you work in a shop, that's, running the tills. Or if you work in an office, the things you do in the office. Those are kind of your business of the day sort of jobs. And the thing with business of the day is that they can be divided. Generally, you're in control of business of the day, and it sort of works at whatever the pace people are doing can do. For example, I'm sure most of you at some point in your lives have worked on a checkout. And if you're working a shift on checkout, it's not like you have to keep going if there's still a queue, generally, or depending on how much of a dick your manager is. But generally, it's like, oh, right, yeah, your shift's over, off you pop, even if there is a massive throng of people. Maybe he'll ask you very nicely to stay on. Depends. I probably had a quite good experience with managers. So that's one kind. Like I say, that can be made to fit into whatever the length of shift is you're doing. That can be divided up very nicely. But then you have daily maintenance. Now, these are the things that have to happen to ensure that the business of each day can itself be facilitated. So, for example, if we're talking about a shop, restocking the shelves. I once did a night shift at a local shop, little shop. There was only about a dozen of us working there, so not many people, and it was quite during Christmas. It was a very busy time of year, and one evening I was on the evening shift and did a load of restocking and getting things ready for the next day, and that is a time indifferent task. That task does not care how long your shift is. It does not care if you're meant to be finishing at 10. If it's not done by 10, it's not done by 10, and you're going to go on until like 11 odd. And that's just the way it is. So you have tasks which are time indifferent. They are, irrelevant to whatever your shift is set to. And if you do bugger off, well, then it's just more work on less people or the person who shows up after you to continue that work. Another example would be, for example, cleaning an office building. Now, generally, that's a separate group of people to the people who actually work in the office building. But again, office building needs to be cleaned and maintained in order for it to continue functioning as an office building. So the jobs that are necessary for the building, for the facility, for whatever it is, to continue its function. So you have these two different kinds of job. And with regards to shift patterns, you're going to obviously have to divide up your manpower between these two kinds of tasks. How many people do you want on the business of the day? How many people do you want maintaining? When you start changing, now, I think part of the problem with when Jellicoe comes on board, this is where the big conversation comes from. Jellicoe goes from a 3-shift structure to a 4-shift structure. And it's very disruptive, and everyone's very upset about it. And then everyone's like, why? People have to do less work. Well, no, they don't. So you go from a 3-shift pattern to a 4-shift pattern. You've not actually changed the amount of work that needs doing. In fact, when Jellicoe comes aboard, he says he wants this, this, and this done, and he wants it done yesterday. And so you've got additional work, you've got additional business of the day, on top of the fact that suddenly everyone is now, any given shift has gone from about 300 people to about 250 people. But the amount of work is the same, if not more, and your constraints in which you have to complete your tasks have narrowed a little bit. So instead of 8 hours, you've only got 6 hours, possibly. But essentially, when Jellicoe changes those shifts, you have less manpower, less time, thus less work gets done, thus more spills over into the next shift, which means that there's more for the next shift to have to be doing. So in that regard, you can see the problem of that kind of, not necessarily that kind of structure, because I will go into the advantages of it, but you can see the disruption that is caused, especially in that situation. Now, I will give the devil his dues. A lot of people on the Discord agreed that actually they would prefer the 4-shift. I think it's more because they prefer the idea of a 6-hour working day. But end of the day, it's like that just means more work needs doing by someone else. You might say 8-hour shifts are sort of built in with, there's a whole discussion there about kind of inefficiency and how much you account for personal inefficiency. And if you give people 8 hours, you give them a little bit of buffer time, a little bit of time in which they can be inefficient and still get the job done. Whereas if perhaps you only gave them a 6-hour work day, then it would be pretty full on. What are the advantages of 4? Why does Jellicoe like this idea? Why did he implement it on the Enterprise? Well, firstly, it's more amenable to double shifting. So, you hear this all the time from Geordie. Oh, we'll have to pull double shift, triple shift, whatever. We'll have to work round the clock. A double shift on an 8-hour schedule is going to be 16 hours. That's a lot. That's a long old time. Yes, you get your solid 8 hours of rest, but otherwise it's very full on. Whereas if you go to a double shift on a 4-shift rotation, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. 12 hours on, 12 hours off, which gives the person, as well as their 8 hours of sleep, an additional 4 hours of other kind of recreation and leisure. So it's actually less full on in some respects. You can also divide it up. I mean, you can divide it up. This is less of a good idea, depending on how Mediterranean you want to be. But if you're a more Mediterranean culture in your ship, you might actually want 6 hours on, 6 hours off, then 6 hours on for double shifting, instead of the 16-hour chunk, which is inevitably going to happen in the 3-shift rotation. You're always going to have a run-on shift, as opposed to double shifting, where you can either make it a 12-hour chunk, or you can make it a 2 6-hour chunks with 6 hours in between each. There's some good advantages. There's a lot more flexibility there, definitely. Although you can't realistically go down, you can't realistically go up to triple shifts. You could. People would be operating on 6 hours sleep. It's doable, and it's still not 100%. All hands on deck. There's still enough rest, and you can sustain that for a while. So that is another potential possibility. And that will give your crew better focus and concentration, rather than, again, 8 hours. There's a little bit of time where your mind might just slip. So really, in conclusion, there's a lot to be said for the 4-shift rotation. It has a lot more flexibility. It enables greater concentration, which, particularly in the instance of a conflict situation or, a high tension situation, maintaining concentration is going to be very important. You want people to be rested, but you also want people to not be too relaxed. And 6 hours is a good amount of time to keep someone on their toes, as opposed to 8 hours where you'll probably wear them out. So really, just in way of concluding remarks, 1, I think the Enterprise D needs more crew. I don't know how you can run that ship on 330 people at any one time. Compare this to the Constitution refit, which is about just over 450 people on a ship that is much, much, much smaller than the Enterprise D. And, you divide that into, well, let's say, because it is more tactically oriented, let's divide it into 4 shifts. That's 100 people each shift, which is pretty good if we were to go on the 4-shift routine, which makes sense for a ship in a period of heightened tensions. So the 3-shift routine is very good for a more sedentary lifestyle and exploration. Things aren't too unpredictable when you're going out exploring until they are. But for the most part, it's just, we're going to go to a place, we're going to chart this, we're going to go to a place, we're going to look at this, we're going to take some colonists here, we're going to go and investigate that. It's a very steady, office-like pace to the working day. Unlike, say, a ship that is more oriented towards combat, where you need a little bit more flexibility, you need to be a lot more adaptable, because you will go from needing not many people to run the ship if you're just doing a border patrol. If you're doing a scientific exploration, you need people to be doing all the busy work of science, which there is a lot of busy work. My godfather's an astrophysicist, and, he can definitely tell you that astrophysics and looking through those nice fancy telescopes involves a lot of just busy work and raw data that isn't very interesting to look at. That's what doing science mostly is a lot of information, most of which you're not interested in. So, you actually need a fair amount of manpower on for those kind of missions. Whereas if you're just doing patrol on a border, you don't need so many people until you really do. And then, because you're on that 4-shift rotation, people are better rested and a lot more alert and ready to go. So it's a much better pattern for a wartime combat environment. but it is more manpower intensive overall. You are demanding, if you then start stacking demands, again, it's a bit different if the ship is tied to a station or a starbase, where they can take off a lot of the burden of those maintenance tasks. But if you're doing a long-term deployment far away from a base, that's going to be very strenuous on a 4-shift rotation. And it does also make people, because it's more flexible, there's more temptation to, exercise that flexibility and have people pull an extra shift here, another one there, a double here. And it makes it harder for people to get into a routine. Which, again, if you want people to be alert and not too relaxed, that's actually quite useful. So, ultimately, I'll just turn this question over to you guys. What do you think? What shift pattern do you think is better? Like I say, just because you have a 6-hour shift does not mean you'll end up doing less work, which is, I think, something that in the contemporary conversation about length of work days is an idea that a lot of people get fixated on. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Which shift pattern do you think works best? And do you think it's right to sort of divide them into these two contexts of one is more for combat and one is more for exploration? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.